reading The Comedians. It's a book by Greene, published 1966, and it plays in Haiti. Mr. Brown, who was one of the comedians and tells the story, owns a hotel in Port-au-Prince. And the other two comedians, they all shared the journey on the cargo ship, is Mr. Smith, who is a presidential candidate, or was once, and Mr. Jones, who calls himself Major Jones. We are now in the place, but Mr. Brown talked quite a lot about his history. We are now in the second part, in chapter 3, and it's Roman 4. I was nearly half an hour late when I found the car with a CD sign outside the casino. There had been a great deal to keep me, and I was not really in the humour to come at all. I couldn't pretend to myself that I was in love with Madame Pineda. A bit of lust and a bit of curiosity was all I thought I felt driving into town. I remembered everything in the register against her, that she was a German, that she had made the first move, that she was an ambassador's wife. I would certainly hear the chandeliers and the cocktail glasses tinkle in her conversation. She opened the car door for me. I nearly gave up on you, she said. I'm sorry. A lot of things have happened. Now you are here. We had better drive away. Our colleagues begin to arrive after 11 when the official diners are over. She backed the car out. Where are we going? I asked. I don't know. What made you speak to me last night? I don't know. You followed my luck. Yes, I suppose I was curious to see what your mother's son was like. Nothing new ever happens here. Ahead of us, the port lay in a wash of temporary floodlights. The two cargo ships were being unloaded. There was a long procession of bowed figures under sacks. She swung the car round in a half circle and brought it into a deep patch of shadow, close to the white statue of Columbus. None of our kind come here at night, she said, and so no beggars come either. What about the police? The CD plate has some value. I wondered which of us was using the other. I had not made love to a woman for some months, and she had obviously reached the dead end of most marriages. But I was crippled by the events of the day, and I wished I had not come, and I couldn't help remembering she was German, even though she was too young to bear any guilt herself. There was only one reason for us both to be there, and yet we did nothing. We sat and stared at the statue, which stared at America. To escape from the absurdity, I put my hand on her knee. The skirt felt cold. She wore no stockings. I said, "What's your name?" "Martha." She turned as she answered, and I kissed her clumsily and missed her mouth. She said, "We needn't, you know. We're grown-up people," and suddenly I was back in the Hilton de Paris, and powerless, and no bird came to save me on white wings. "I only want to talk," she lied to me gently. "I would have thought you had plenty to talk about at the embassy. Last night would have been all right if I could have come to your hotel." "Thank God you didn't," I said. "There was trouble enough there." "What kind of trouble?" "Don't let's talk about it now." Again, to disguise my lack of feeling, I acted crudely. I pulled her body out from under the wheel and thrust her across my thighs, scraping her leg on the radio set so that she exclaimed with pain. "I'm sorry. It was nothing." She settled herself more easily. She put her lips against my neck, but I felt nothing. Nothing moved in me, and I wondered how long she would put up with her disappointment if she were disappointed. Then, for a long moment, I forgot all about her. I was back in the midday heat, knocking at the door of what had been my mother's room, and getting no response. I knocked and thinking that Marcel was in a drunken sleep. Tell me about the trouble, she said. Suddenly I began to talk. I told her how the room boy became anxious, and then Joseph, and how finally, when there was no reply to my knocking, I used the pass key and found that the door was bolted. I had to tear down the partition between two balconies and scramble from one to the other. Luckily the guests were away, swimming on the reef. I found Marcel hanging from his own belt from the center light. He must have had great resolution, for he only had to swing a few inches to land his toes on the curlicued ends of my mother's great bed. The rum had all been drunk, except a little in the second bottle, and in an envelope addressed to me he had put what was left of the $300. You can imagine, I said, how I've been occupied since. What with the police and the guests too. The American professor was reasonable, but there was an English couple who said that they were going to report it to their travel agent. Apparently a suicide places a hotel in a lower price bracket. It's not an auspicious beginning. It was a horrible shock, she said. I didn't know him or care about him, but it was a shock, yes. It really was a shock. Apparently, I shall have to say that to have the room purified by a priest or a hungan. I'm not sure which. And the lamp has to be destroyed. The servants insist on that. It proved a relief to talk, and with words desire came. The back of her neck was against my mouth, and one leg sprawl-eagled across the radio. She shivered, and her hand shot out, and by bad chance fell on the rim of the wheel, and set the claxton crying. It went on wailing like a wounded animal, or a ship lost in fog, until the shiver stopped. We sat in silence in the same cramped position, like two pieces of machinery which an engineer had just failed to fit. It was the moment to say goodbye and go. The longer we stayed, the greater demands the future would hold for us. In silence, trust begins. Contentment grows. I realized I had slept a moment, woken and found her sleeping. Sleep shared was a bond too many. I looked at my watch. It was long before midnight. The cranes ground over the cargo ships, and the long procession of workers passed from boat to warehouse, bent under their cowls of sacks like Capuchin monks. One leg hurt me. I shifted it and woke her. She struggled away and said sharply, "What's the time?" 20 to 12. I dreamt the car had broken down and it was 1 in the morning, she said. I felt put in the place where I belonged, between the hours of 10 and 1. It was a daunting thought how quickly jealousy grows. I had barely known her for 24 hours, and already I resented the demands of others. "What's the matter?" she asked. "I was wondering when we shall see each other again." "At the same time tomorrow, here. This is as good as any other place, isn't it? Take a different taxi driver, that's all." It wasn't exactly an ideal bed. "We'll get in the back of the car. It will be all right there," she said, with a precision that depressed me. So it was our affair began, and so it continued, with minor differences. For example, a year later she changed her Peugeot for a newer model. There were occasions, once her husband was recalled for consultation, when we escaped the car. Once, with the help of a woman friend, we passed 2 days together in Haitian, but then the friend went home. It sometimes seemed to me that we were less lovers than fellow conspirators, tied together in the commission of a crime. And like conspirators, we were well aware of the detectives on our tracks. One of them was a child. I went over to a cocktail party at the embassy. There was no reason why I should not have been invited, for within 6 months of our meeting I had become an accepted member of the foreign community. My hotel was a modest success, though I was not content with modesty, and I still dreamt of that first-class cook. I had met the ambassador first when he drove one of my guests, a fellow countryman, back to the hotel after dinner at the embassy. He accepted and praised one of Joseph's drinks, and the shadow of his long cigar lay for a while across my veranda. I have never heard a man use the word "my" more frequently. Oops, that was a fly. Have one of my cigars, please. Let my chauffeur have a drink. We spoke of the coming elections. My opinion is the doctor will succeed. He has American support. That is my information. He invited me to my next cocktail party. Why did I resent him? I was not in love with his wife. I had made her, that was all, or so I believed at the time. Was it that in the course of our conversation he had discovered I had been educated by the fathers of the visitation and claimed a kind of kinship? I was at the College of St. Ignatius in Paraguay, Uruguay. Who cares? I learned later that the cocktail party to which in due course I was invited belonged to the second-class order. The first class, where caviar was served, being purely diplomatic, ambassadors, ministers, first secretaries, while the third class was purely duty. It was a compliment to be included in the second, which was supposed to contain elements of fun. There were a number of rich Haitian there, with wives of a rare beauty. The time had not yet come for them to flee the country, or to remain shut in their houses at night for fear of what might happen to them in the dark curfew streets. The ambassador introduced me to my wife, my again, and led me to the bar to find me a drink. Tomorrow night, I asked, and she frowned at me and pursed her lips to indicate I was not to speak, that we were under observation. But it was not her husband she feared. He was busy showing my collection of hypopyrite paintings to one of his guests, moving from picture to picture, explaining each one as though the subject too belonged to him. Your husband can't hear in all this din. Can't you see, she said, that he is listening to every word? But the he was not her husband. A small creature, not much more than 3 feet high, with dark, concentrated eyes, was forcing his way towards us with the arrogance of a midget, thrusting aside the knees of guests as though they were the undergrowth of a wood which belonged to him. I saw he had his eyes on her mouth, as though he were lip-reading. My son Angel, she introduced him, and always I thought of him after that in the English pronunciation of the name, like a kind of blasphemy. Once he had regained her sight, he hardly left it. Though he never spoke at all, he was too busy listening while his small steely hand grasped hers, like one half of a handcuff. I had met my real rival. She told me, when we next met, that he had asked a great many questions about me. He smells something's wrong. How could he at his age? He's barely 5. A year passed, and we found ways of outwitting him, but his claims on her remained. I discovered she was indispensable to me, but when I pressed her to leave her husband, the child blocked her escape. She could do nothing to endanger his happiness. She would leave her husband tomorrow, but how could she survive if he took Angel from her? And it seemed to me that month by month the son grew more to resemble the father. He had a way now of saying "my mother," and once I saw him with a long chocolate cigar in his mouth. He was putting on weight rapidly. It was as though the father had incarnated his own demon to ensure that our affair did not go too far beyond the bounds of prudence. There was a time when we took a room for meeting above a Syrian store. The storekeeper, whose name was Hamid, was completely reliable. It was just after the doctor came to power, and the shadow of the future was there for anyone to see, black as the cloud on Kenskov. Any kind of connection with a foreign embassy had value for a stateless man, for who could tell at what hour he might not have to take political asylum. Unfortunately, though, we had both closely examined the store, we did not realize that, in a corner, behind the pharmaceutical products, there were a few shelves given up to toys of better quality than could be found elsewhere, and among the groceries, for the luxury trade had not yet entirely ceased, a tin of bourbon biscuits could be occasionally found, a favorite provider of Angel between meals. This led to our first big quarrel. We had already met 3 times in the Syrian room, which contained a brass bed under a mauve silk counterpane, and 4 hard upright chairs lined along the wall, and a number of hand-tinted photographs of family groups. I think it was the guest room, kept immaculate for some important visitor from Lebanon, who never came and never would come now. The 4th time I waited for 2 hours and Martha did not appear at all. I went out through the store and the Syrian spoke to me discreetly. "You have missed Madame Pineda," he said. "She was here with her little boy." "Her little boy?" That brought a miniature car. They bought a miniature car and a box of bourbon biscuits. Later that evening she rang me. She sounded breathless and afraid, and she spoke very rapidly. "I'm at the post office," she said. "I left Angel in the car, eating bourbon biscuits." "Bourbon biscuits? How did you know, darling? I couldn't come to you. When I got to the shop, I found Angel there with his nurse. I had to pretend I'd come to buy him something as a reward for being good." "Has he been good?" "Not particularly. His nurse said they saw me come out last week. It was a good thing we never leave together. And he wanted to see where I'd been, and that's how he discovered the biscuits he liked. The bourbon biscuits." "Yes. Oh, he's coming into the post office now to find me. Tonight, same place." The telephone went dead. So we met again by the Columbus statue in the Peugeot car. That time we didn't make love. We quarreled. I told her Angel was a spoiled child, and she admitted it. But when I said that he spied on her, she was angry, and when I said he was getting as fat as his father, she tried to slap my face. I caught her wrist, and she accused me of striking her. Then we laughed, nervously, but the quarrel simmered on, like stock for tomorrow's soup. I said very reasonably, "You would do better to make a break one way or the other. This kind of life can't go on indefinitely." "Do you want me to leave you then?" "Of course not. But I can't live without Angel. It's not his fault if I've spoiled him. He needs me. I can't ruin his happiness. In 10 years he won't need you at all. He'll be slinking off to Mère Catherine or sleeping with one of your maids. Except that you won't be here. You'll be in Brussels or Luxembourg. But there are brothels for him there too. 10 years is a long time. And you'll be middle-aged, and I'll be old, too old to care. And you'll live on with 2 fat men and a good conscience, of course. You will have salvaged that. And you? Don't tell me you won't have comforted by all sorts of women in all sorts of ways. You won't have been comforted by all sorts of women in all sorts of ways. Our voices rose higher and higher in the darkness under the statue. Like all such quarrels, it led to nothing, except a wound which easily heals. There are places for so many different wounds before we found ourselves breaking an old scab. I got out of her car and walked across to mine. I sat down at the wheel and began to back the car. I told myself it was the end. The game wasn't worth the candle. Let her stay with her beastly child. There were many more attractive women to be found at Madame Catherine's. She was a German anyway. I called, "Good night, Frau Pineda," viciously out of the window as I came parallel to her car, and then I saw her bend over the wheel, crying. I suppose it was necessary to say goodbye to her, and once before I realized that I could not do without her. When I got back beside her, she was already in control. "It's no good," she said, "tonight." "No." "Shall we see each other tomorrow?" "Of course." "Here, as usual?" "Yes." She said, "There's something I meant to tell you, a surprise for you, something you badly want." For a moment I thought she was going to surrender to me and promise to leave her husband and her child. I put my arm around her to support her in the great decision, and she said, "You need a good cook, don't you?" "Oh, yes, I suppose I do. We've got a wonderful cook, and he's leaving us. I engineered a row on purpose and sacked him. He's yours if you want him." I think she was hurt again by my silence. "Now, don't you believe I love you? My husband will be furious. He said that André was the only cook in Port-au-Prince who could make a proper soufflé." I stopped myself just in time from saying, "An angel? He likes his food too." You've made my fortune," I said instead, and what I said was nearly true. The Trianon soufflé au Grand Marnier was famous for a time, until the terror started and the American mission left, and the British ambassador was expelled, and the nuncio never returned from Rome, and the curfew put a barrier between us worse than any quarrel, until at last I too flew out on the last Delta plane to New Orleans. Joseph had only just escaped with his life from his interrogations by the Tonton Macoute, and I was scared. They were after me. I felt certain. Perhaps Fat Gracia, the head of the Tontons, wanted my hotel. Even Petit Pierre no longer looked in for a free drink. For weeks I was alone with the injured Joseph, the cook, the maid, and the gardener. The hotel had need of paint and repairs, but what good was there in spending the labour without the hope of a guest? Only the John Barrymore suit I kept in good order, like a grave. There was a little in our love affair now to balance the fear and the boredom. The telephone had ceased to work. It stood there on my desk like a relic of better times. With a curfew it was no longer possible for us to meet at night, while in the day there was always Angel. I thought I was escaping from love as well as politics, when at last I received my exit visa at the police station after 10 hours wait. With a heavy smell of urine in the air and policemen returning with a smile of satisfaction from the cells, I remember a priest who sat all day in a white soutane and his stony attitude of long and undisturbed patience as he read his breviary. His name was never called. Pinned behind his head on the liver-coloured wall were the snapshots of Barbot, the dead defector, and his broken companions, who had been machine-gunned in a hut on the edge of the capital a month before. When the police sergeant gave me my visa at last, shoving it across the counter like a crust of bread to a beggar, someone told the priest that the police station was closed for the night. I suppose he came back next day. It was as good a place as any other for him to read his breviary. For more of the transients dared to speak to him now that the archbishop was in exile and the president excommunicated. What a wonderful place the city had been to leave, as I looked down at it from the free and lucid air, the plane pitching in the thunderstorm which loomed as usual over Kentcott. The port seemed tiny compared with the vast wrinkled wasteland behind, the dry, uninhabited mountains, like the broken backbone of an ancient beast excavated from the clay, stretching into the haze towards Haitian and the Dominican border. I would find some gambler, I told myself, to buy my hotel, and I would then be as unencumbered as on the day I drove up to Pentonville. and found my mother stretched in her great brothely bed. I was happy to leave. I whispered it to the black mountain wheeling around below. I showed it in my smile to the trim American stewardess, bringing me a highball of bourbon, and to the pilot who came to report progress. It was 4 weeks before I woke to misery in my air-conditioned New York room in West 44th Street, after dreaming of a tangle of limbs in a Peugeot car, and a statue staring at the sea. I knew then that sooner or later I would return, when my obstinacy was exhausted, my business deals written off, and half a loaf eaten in fear would seem so much better than no bread. So this is the end of this chapter 3, and I start with chapter